Okay, so welcome. Today I wanted to introduce to all of you Anthony Estrada, who I'd like to share his story with all of you in terms of his remarkable understanding and his remarkable experience of having a CSF leak. Anthony actually contacted me after he suffered a CSF leak, and from the perspective of the cerebrospinal fluid, I was really interested in sharing his story with all of you in terms of really kind of having a greater understanding of this fluid, of the cerebrospinal fluid, and what sort of information it might be able to carry. So with that, thank you so much for coming today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So first of all, tell us um, tell us what you were doing, or what your experience was, how you knew that something was off. Let's say.
Yeah, so a few months ago, I was working and I was walking around doing my thing, and all of a sudden I started to get these really intense headaches, and I would just start throwing up randomly, and I didn't understand what was going on. It was kind of freaking me out a little bit. I thought I was just tired or whatever may happen. A couple days later, same thing. I was just kind of sitting down. I thought I was just hungry or tired, and then again, just started sort of, gagging and uh, things just started to get super weird. And then a couple of days later, I remember because it was Easter Sunday, I was with my family and I was about ready to go home from my brother's house. And he goes, "Man, you look terrible. You should think about staying here tonight." I was like, "Nah, I'll make it home okay." And I started driving home and the freeway started to just zone out and everything started to just go into a daze. And I was like, "Man, I need to throw up really bad." So I pulled over my car and I just started vomiting in the back of an alley somewhere in Orange County. And I was frantic, calling parents, anyone that would come get me to see because it was super late at night. Thankfully, my parents came and got me. And then the next day, I was at their house resting. It's like I think I'll be okay. And then later that night, I couldn't get off the couch and I couldn't move. And even needing to go to the bathroom, I would have to call my dad, who at the time had a really bad hip, to sort of just walk me to the bathroom. And as an athlete, as someone who takes really great care of myself, it was so jarring because all of a sudden I just couldn't move. And it was, I would go to different doctors and they said, "Oh, well, you just have headaches." And I was like, "I can't move. This isn't a headache. This doesn't feel right." And thankfully, one doctor whom my mom had worked with for like 30 something years said, "There's just one thing. It's probably not this, but there's an off chance because sometimes it mostly happens in pregnant women after an epidural shot, but it may be this thing called a CSF leak." And he did this additional testing that no other doctors had done at that point. And he was like, "Yeah, I think this is what it is." And sure enough, when I went to go see the neurologist, they were like, "Yeah, you have a CSF leak." So that was the whole start of the journey, to where at first there's thoughts that it may be a brain tumor, which sent me down a whole existential hole for a while of, how I'd lived my life and all this stuff, as well as just not knowing what this very mysterious illness was and why it knocked me down so hard. And then it came down to really, getting different shots, getting epidural blood patches, all these things that they kept saying would work, and they weren't working. And it was really disconcerting to me because, doctors are supposed to know how to fix you, basically, And as I kept going into this, and they just kept saying, we don't know, we don't know what to do. I finally reached this point of frustration after seeing a neurologist who I'd really gotten to know and trust. And when he said he didn't know what else to do at this point, I was pretty much so frustrated, so over it, that I just looked up spinal leak and spirituality. Because most of the time when I have injuries that I can't resolve, I tend to think it's an emotional or psychological, spiritual ailment that's actually getting to me. And once I did that, that's when I stumbled upon your work and a whole new world opened up to me. So,
Fascinating.
yeah.
Um, so had you like known about the cerebrospinal fluid prior to this? Had you done any like reading about the cerebrospinal fluid prior to having these headaches?
No, I had no idea that it even existed. I knew that there was like some fluid that was in your brain that basically kept it afloat, was my very basic understanding of it. And everyone, once I found out what the injury was, everyone was like, what the heck is that? And then they would look it up and they go, damn, that sounds intense. And I was like, oh, it was. So, it was such an unknown thing that, even when you talk to doctors about it, they obviously know what it was, but they couldn't even guess that that was what the issue may be.
Can you describe any of the treatments that you have tried and which ones helped the most for you?
Yeah, so I've had two epidural blood patches. Those definitely helped me sort of get back on my feet, but it never fully resolved it. The other thing that they've done is I've gone through three sets of 6 shots. So I think it's about 18 shots now, where they do two in the head here, two in the side here, and then two in the back. Again, still hasn't fully resolved the issue, but those have been the treatments that I've gone through so far, along with, elongated rest, no screens, all that jazz.
And were there any episodes where you felt like you were bedbound, like you couldn't stand, you were dizzy, or your balance issues or anything like that? And have you had any medications to help?
Yeah, so the first the first 2 weeks that those were the weeks I was sort of describing to you. Those I really couldn't get out of bed, and I couldn't really move faster than I think it was like 2 miles an hour or something like that. And again, as an athlete, as a sprinter, as a long distance runner, that was highly unusual for me not to be able to move like that. So, I would get up and I would just want to go back down, and or I would get my head up for a moment and it would just be this really intense throbbing. And even when I laid down, it still felt pretty bad, but it wasn't nearly as bad. So, there was definitely spells of dizziness where I would stand up, try to lift my head, and I would get super dizzy, or I would just sort of fall to the ground and my dad would sort of have to catch me before I fell. So yeah, I went through all those things. It was pretty gnarly.
What could you describe your lifestyle prior to the CSF leak?
Absolutely. So I mean, I've had very intense jobs. I've worked in the entertainment industry for quite some time, both as a producer and as a talent manager, working for high end talent and stuff like that. So it's a very intense lifestyle oftentimes. On top of that, I work out, 6 to 7 days a week. I'm a triathlete. I've done marathons, everything you can think of fitness wise. I've probably done it. And then just I read a lot. I invest myself in ballet, in karate, martial arts, all these other things just to keep myself as well rounded as possible. So some might say I'm hyperactive, but that was definitely my life before it. And it's definitely been a reevaluation period of that.
Fascinating. And what what made you feel it, like what did you feel inside to look up, cerebrospinal fluid and spirituality, or CSF leak and spirituality?
Yeah,
It's a pretty interesting sort of search. And I'm really curious about the impulse to do that, and what kind of led you to do that initially, and then also what you found, what
yeah,
your experience of that was.
yeah. So that was pretty wild. It was interesting because I've always had this sort of spiritual side to me where I've wanted to know more. I've wanted to figure out more about myself and about, who I am as part of the greater whole. And, sometimes when I haven't been able to resolve issues, I'll go to, well, what could be the emotional root cause of this? And it's been crazy because oftentimes after going through medications or physical therapy for certain treatments, sometimes when I deal with those emotional issues, all of a sudden it goes away. Like I had heartburn for a really long time. And then I learned that, hey, this can be caused by not dealing with past, childhood stuff. And then all of a sudden, once I started dealing with it, it goes away. And I was like, wow. after several years, it's gone, So it was things like that where it was always kind of in my brain, but I never really wanted to fully invest myself in it. And then it came, what really started to do it for me was, yeah, I'd read Dr. Lisa Miller's book on the science of spirituality about a year ago. And that really started to get me to, I'll say, tune in to the world around me, really start to pay attention. I had always felt like I had some sort of connection, like we all do, but I felt like I was really starting to tune into it. But I was getting more forceful about it and looking for the answers and trying to figure them out as opposed to letting them come to me. So then one day, I was actually before my second to last set of shots. It was my last day working for a client, and I was at this point where I was like, I just had the CSF leak. I thought I was supposed to be reevaluating my life. Clearly, I'm doing something wrong because I'm still not like really doing what I want to do. I'm not enjoying myself. I'm getting everything I want, but something still doesn't feel right. And the fact that I have to keep getting these shots is driving me nuts. I can endure pain with the best of them, but this was really starting to get to me. Uh, and then, on that last day, I happened to see a friend whom I had known for quite some time, and we had had, a fracture in our relationship. And when I saw her, I had noticed some physical ailments that she had told me about in the past. And my thought was, these had been going on for months, and yet they're still there. You're not getting to the root of the problem. I didn't say this to her, but this is what I was thinking in my mind, right? And then, when I was at the doctor's office after getting my shots, I looked up, her ailment and spirituality. And I was like, oh, that actually ties a lot to what I felt is coming from her and what I felt, some things that she was dealing with. And then I was like, but you can't do that to somebody else and not do it to yourself. That is so judgmental. That is so wrong. And like, that is so not okay, because you must always turn the mirror on yourself first. And then it dawned on me, I was like, wait, you're sitting in a doctor's office. You've been going through treatment for months, trying to figure out what's wrong with you. And you haven't had the gall or the audacity to look up spinal leak and spirituality. And then that's when it hit me. I just did a quick search, and I was like, oh my gosh, this has to do with higher consciousness. And this has to do with, tapping in and all this other stuff, which I'd already been feeling. And then to see that, it hit me like a shockwave. And, I started to get chills. I was like, okay, something's going on here. So I got home that day. After the shots, I'm always exhausted. And so I was laying down on my couch, and I had looked up your talk, it had come up, and I just was listening to it. And, everything you were saying really started to connect with me. It started to connect all the dots for what I had already felt, what I had learned in the past about spirituality and all these different spiritual modalities. And then there was a certain point where you said, the cerebral spinal fluid regenerates at about a half liter a day. And at that time, you held up a product from that very company that I was at that day. And I was like, what the hell? This is weird. And then after that, you just kept saying more and more stuff that was connecting to what I had known about spirituality, and specifically about the bluish hue of the cerebral spinal fluid, and how it, in my really deep meditations, my really great meditations, that was the hue I was seeing. The way you described it was exactly what I was seeing. And that's where I was like, okay, I'm definitely onto something here, and I'm definitely tapping into something here. So later that day, I call my mom and I say, Mom, hear me out. This is going to sound really weird, but trust me. And she goes, okay, you always have wild ideas, but let me just hear what you got. So I start telling her, and she goes, I don't know if I really, I grew up Catholic. I'm not sure if this is really it. I was like, this has nothing to do with Catholicism, or, just hear me out. So I start telling her, and then I tell her the part about the product that you raised up. And she goes, oh my God, I'm so in now. Finish your story. So I started telling her about all the connections I started to draw and everything that I started to see, and how the dots just started to connect. And she said to me, how many more times do people have to tell you that you see things at a higher level and you connect dots that other people don't see? That you see through people and get to their emotional core, yet you don't believe it yet. You've had your mentor tell you this, you've had me tell you this, you've had friends tell you this, you've had business associates tell you this. And now this doctor is tying it all together for you. How much more do you need for people to tell you until you start to trust it yourself? And it was a harsh dose of reality, but the thing I needed to hear the most. And from that point on, it was just like, okay, well, you need to start speaking about these things. You need to start sharing these things in a way that is approachable, and you need to share it in a way that can be helpful to people. So that was really what started me really listening to it and really starting to feel it. And, there's been a whole other slew of events that have gone on that have opened it up even more, but that was really the core of
Wow, that seems like uh, let's say a big signal from the universe, huh?
it. Yeah. Yeah, and it's funny because even as something as simple as before I looked up spinal leak and spirituality, there was I had seen a butterfly for like 3 weeks in a row. I don't ever see butterflies. I never like come across them, but it was almost like when I was walking, they would just follow me. And I would talk to a friend about it. She's like, "Oh my God, that's crazy." And then all of a sudden, as I'm telling the story in the middle of a parking lot in the middle of the city, a butterfly flies by, and I just go, okay, this is freaking strange, right? And it's like there's clearly some sort of interconnectedness to this, and there's some sort of thing that you're feeling, or something that you're vibing, or something that you're giving off that is being both received by a higher source, and you actually being willing to receive it now. And that to me was, again, just a mild signal, a little tap on the shoulder that's like, you need to really listen to this.
That's really cool. Um, and so now, what is your relationship to this fluid, this cerebrospinal fluid? How do you feel like, it seems like this has been a big opening for you, and like a connection to something else, or a greater connection, or a greater awareness of that connection, that you're more easily tapping into, or allowing yourself to tap into. How do you see, like, how do you what's your relationship now with the cerebrospinal fluid itself?
Yeah, I mean, I'm hyper attentive to it now, and it's like maybe at times too attentive to it, but at the same time, I like to really engage with it, because if I feel my head throbbing, right, I go, clearly you're not speaking up, clearly you're not connecting to something, clearly you're
Mm,
not opening yourself up to something. And that to me is always a really important thing to pay attention to. And sometimes obviously it's a physical ailment where I'm like, you're not drinking enough water today, make sure you're drinking water. But it really is coming down, because I know that the issue I've had with cerebral spinal fluid doesn't just come down to physical ailments anymore, and it doesn't come down to just drinking enough water. I'm understanding that when I am not allowing what I believe to be higher energy in, or higher power in, that's when I start to really feel a thump. Or if I really am fighting my ego, or whatever it may be, that's when I feel the need to lay down and stuff like that. So it's been for as unfortunate as the whole ordeal was, it has been one of the greatest things that's happened to me, because of how much it's really opened up my heart and my soul to these things.
that's powerful.
Thank you.
That's really powerful. Um, Despite getting all the shots and going through all the tests and stuff like that, right?
Yep, absolutely. And
That's
and I try not to, be on a soapbox about these things, but I find myself now, when I'm talking to people and they're telling me about an injury or something like that, whether it's with their head or something else, I find myself talking to them about their emotional state. And I find myself talking to them about what's going on with them. Hey, I know you're dealing with this, but have you thought about possibly doing this? And then just seeing the stoic look on their face. You see the defense up of like smiling or whatever, and then you go, oh, you just said something that resonated with them. And then to have them come back to you, a week later, 2 weeks later, go, man, I'm really glad that you said that, because XYZ helped me to resolve this issue. I'm like, God, that's amazing, and everything I could hope for. I'm not saying I'm a healer by any stretch of the imagination, but it's like, if you're listening to what's there for you, you can actually really dig into the source of these issues and these things that are digging away at you.
for sure. Wow. Do you feel like, because of the CSF leak, you have an ability now to actually perceive the movement of the fluid?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm super tuned into it, but I can definitely say when I'll say the levels feel low, or when I feel like, oh man, I need some sort of regeneration here. Like it's becoming like abundantly clear, whether it's through the head throbbing or whether it's through just general exhaustion when I'm not doing much. It's, hey, do I need more water? Hey, do I need rest? Hey, is there something I'm not dealing with that I need to deal with? Whatever the answer may be, it's kind of like a threefold test now of which one is it? Or is it some combination of the three?
Yeah, yeah. What I really like is the sort of the full spectrum of questions that you're asking, right? You're going all the way from the spiritual to to the physical, and knowing that that it's really about the holistic experience, right? This could be it could be purely dehydration, right? And then we're
Yeah.
like, okay, let's drink some water, but that understanding, which really came from you. Like it seems like this was very intrinsic. Like there was this knowledge inside of you that built up, that came through you, that wasn't because of people telling you something. This really was an authentic experience that arose through you. Is that correct?
Yeah, and it's interesting because my parents would often say growing up, they're like the way when you were a little kid that you could talk to adults and see through adults, it was bizarre. And it was strange to us because we hadn't really seen anything like it before. And I think, as I grew up and I started to understand who I was as a person, and also, the way I started to look at the world, you start to shut it off or you start to tune it out. And I've seen in my nieces and nephews, for instance, their ability to really see things in people. But as you grow up and as you engage with the world, you start to tune those things out. You start to shut them down, to no fault of their own, really. It's it's something where I've always felt it, but I wanted to close it off, or because of my understanding of the world, I was like, well, people shouldn't see this side of it, or I shouldn't talk about this, or, you know, if I'm seeing this connection, is it going to be too woo woo for people to understand, all that stuff. And I didn't really start to engage with it until truly about 2.5, 3 years ago. That's when I started to get like, okay, now I'm curious. Now there's something to it. And I owe a big credit to my mentor Michael Nicklin, who's been a big part of my spiritual life and guided me, where he's always told me there's something in you that you must share. You just have to be willing to see it, or you have to be willing to engage with it. And again, he comes from a very, I don't want to say from strictly Eastern, but from a strong Eastern philosophy background with Western sort of data to support it. And it's taken me a while to start to get over that hump. So when you're talking about, you look at the physical and the holistic approach, that's exactly sort of my approach to it. Is I don't just like talking about one side of it. I like talking about the other side of it too, because I believe so strongly that the two are interconnected and that they both need to be spoken about and dealt with.
Yeah, that's really remarkable, really beautiful. Your journey. My hope is to be able to share your journey with others who have experienced CSF leaks, and see if there's, as you said, right, as potentially devastating as they can be, and as the symptoms can really take you off your feet, that there may be bigger questions to ask and address. Maybe not always, right? But to be open to that possibility, and then to see maybe a connection with this with the cerebrospinal fluid, and actually start having a relationship with it, kind of like as you have done so yourself. And maybe allowing yourself to open up to a higher to some sort of higher source, or higher energy. uh,
Absolutely. And I feel that, um, the universe, God, whatever your spiritual belief may be, that you will continue to get the same test until you pass it or you choose not to listen to it. And then that entity decides, okay, we're done with that. You're clearly not learning the lesson we're trying to get you to learn, right? And when I think about, this particular injury, it was like I got a really intense bout of COVID and I was, bedridden for a week where I couldn't see anything. I went to the hospital, all this stuff, right? And then I got concussions, consecutive concussions. And it was like, hey, we're trying to tell you something here, and you're still not getting it, right? and and then the CSF leak happens, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, I'm getting it now. You don't need to do this anymore. But like you said, it's I do look at certain injuries where I get a paper cut. Is that a message from God? I don't think so all the time, right? But at the same time, when certain things like this happen and you're refusing to answer the call, you're refusing to step up to the plate or refusing to face what it is you're supposed to deal with, then it's just going to keep happening, right? And as I look at it in the times that I've been forced to take a look inward, or I've been forced to slow down, or I've been forced to reevaluate things, I'll do it for a short period, go, okay, I got it. And then 2 months later, something drastic happens again. It's like, shit, when are you going to listen? When are you going to learn? How much more pain do you have to go through to understand it?
Remarkable. Um, I think that's really an amazing journey that you've been on, and I thank you so much for being able to share it. Do you have any final parting words or thoughts or anything for anybody who maybe has experienced the CSF leak, or anybody who wishes to connect more with the cerebrospinal fluid or anything?
Yeah, I think with the CSF injury, it's as messed up as it is and as much pain as it can cause and as hard as it can be on your family and all that stuff, because I went through the full gambit with it all. It's not an easy thing to deal with, and it's I'm still feeling symptoms like 8 months later, right? I'm still going to see doctors and all this stuff, so it's not an easy fix all the time. Sometimes one blood patch does it and you're good, but other times it will continue on like it has with me. The key for me was you can't get overly frustrated with it. As much as I wanted to fight it and as much as I wanted to will myself to walk faster or to lift my head up or to stay standing because of my relentless energy, it's also like just sit with it sometimes. Sitting there for 2 weeks, not being able to talk on my phone, look at my devices, watch TV, as as lonely as it could be sometimes, was such a powerful, time. And it was such a eye-opening time. And if you really do take that opportunity to connect with the cerebral spinal fluid, you just don't know what can open up for your life, right? And I'm not saying you need to go to some ashram in India or something like that or anything like that. It's like, you just need to figure out what that means for you, what that spiritual connection means for you, and how it can better serve the world. Because I will say, since the time of the since the CSF leak and the endurance since, the lessons have been so rapid, so fast. They've caused so much reflection so quickly. And I just feel such a connection to everyone around me and to the greater world that I go, whoa, is this how I'm supposed to be using my energy? Is this
Mm.
how I'm supposed to be serving people? Is this how I'm supposed to be doing this? Because now I look at my life over the last, 2 months in particular and go, this would have never have happened if the CSF didn't happen. These conversations that I'm having with people, these ways that I'm helping people, these ways that I'm speaking to people, or the way business opportunities have come to me, or the way that I'm moving to Sicily in a month. It's like none of this happens without this happening. As again, as terrible as it is, it's like it is what you make of it, right? And yes, it's painful. Yes, it's hard, but truly, I do believe the farther that you go into that pain, and the more that you want to experience it and see it for what it is and for what it's supposed to be, the greater service it will do you in the long run.
Wow. Wow. What a message. That's a message to everyone. That's a message to the world. Yeah, so, you know, my goal is really to increase this awareness for the cerebrospinal fluid, and really kind of bring this message out to the world. So,
Some,
I just really thank you so much for coming today and for sharing your truly intimate personal story with myself and anybody who hears it. And like you said, like getting 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 people to become aware and have a connection,
yeah,
um, and go from there.
yeah.
Beautiful.
Thanks for allowing me to share, and thanks for encouragement to share it. I know I was hesitant before, but really, your encouragement to do this was what sort of put it over the edge, and you know, I'm excited to share it. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
All right.